Out here, the desert doesn't feel empty. People say that when they visit for the first time. They expect silence. They expect nothingness. They expect a kind of peaceful stillness that stretches across the sand. But the desert isn't quiet. It breathes. The wind moves through the dry bushes like something alive. The heat shifts the air until the horizon bends and trembles. At night, the coyotes begin their long, scattered howling, and suddenly the land feels crowded with voices. I've lived out here almost 2 years, long enough that the sounds stopped startling me, long enough that the silence between them started to. My house sits alone about 15 miles outside a desert town. There's a gas station, a diner that opens whenever the owner feels like it, and a small grocery store that mostly sells canned food and dust. Beyond that, it's just dirt roads and miles of desert stretching in every direction. I came here because I wanted isolation. The desert gives you that. Too much of it sometimes. The coyotes were the first thing I noticed when I moved in. At night, they gather somewhere out beyond the low hills. You never see them all together, but you hear them. At first, it sounds like chaos. Yipping, barking, long drawn-out howls that echo through the rocks. But after a while, you realize something. It isn't chaos. It's conversation. They answer each other. They overlap. One voice starts, another picks up, another finishes. It's coordinated, almost organized. About 6 months after I moved in, I was sitting on my porch at dusk, watching the light fade across the desert. Coyotes were howling somewhere off in the west. That was normal. But then the howling stopped all at once. Not faded. Stopped. Like someone had cut the sound off mid-breath. The desert went completely silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. I remember sitting there with my coffee halfway to my mouth, suddenly aware of how quiet everything had become. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then the coyotes started again. But this time, they were closer. I didn't think much of it at first. Coyotes move around constantly. They follow prey, they explore, they test boundaries. But after that night, I started noticing something odd. Every evening around the same time, they would begin their howling. And every evening at some point during it, they would all stop at once. And the silence that followed felt deliberate, like they were listening, I began stepping outside when it happened, just to look. The desert always looked the same: pale sand, scattered brush, the low shapes of distant hills under the moon. But once, during one of those sudden silences, I saw them. 5 coyotes standing on the ridge behind my property, perfectly still, all of them facing the house, watching. Coyotes are curious animals. They'll investigate lights, sounds, smells. They'll even watch you from a distance sometimes. But these, they weren't moving. They weren't sniffing the air or pacing or circling like wild animals usually do. They were just standing there, still, like they were waiting. I went back inside that night and locked the door. Not because I thought they'd attack me. Coyotes rarely bother people. But something about the way they stood there, the stillness, the attention, it unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. A week later, I stepped outside to bring in a folding chair. The moon was bright enough that the desert looked pale and washed out. I bent down to pick up the chair. Something moved at the edge of my vision. Fast. Too fast. A white shape darted across my yard. It crossed the entire property in maybe 2 seconds. Then it vanished into the darkness beyond the fence. At first, I thought it was a dog. Maybe a neighbor's animal had wandered out this far, but the movement wasn't right. Dogs don't move like that. This thing had been low to the ground, but incredibly fast, almost gliding. It had been silent, completely silent. I walked out to the fence with a flashlight. The beam cut across the sand. No tracks. Not one. The ground was soft enough that even a rabbit leaves marks. But here, there was nothing. Just smooth sand under the white light. That was the first night the coyotes didn't howl at all. Not even once. The desert stayed quiet until morning. After that, things started feeling off. Small things at first. The kind of coincidences you tell yourself not to think about too much. I'd step outside and see coyotes again on the ridge. Always in small groups. Always watching the house. Always perfectly still. And sometimes they'd all turn their heads at the same moment. Not toward me, toward the yard. One night I tested something. I walked halfway across the yard and stopped. The coyotes on the ridge stopped moving too. I took another step. They shifted again, their heads following me, not loosely, exactly. Every movement matched. That was the first moment I felt something like fear, not panic, just a quiet realization that the situation didn't make sense. Coyotes don't behave like that. Wild animals don't coordinate their attention so precisely. And they definitely don't watch a human being walk across the yard like a group of observers at a show. Then the figure came back. This time I saw it clearly. Well, clearer. It crossed the far side of the property again. Same speed, same pale color. But as it moved through the moonlight, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. It wasn't running. Its legs weren't moving. It was sliding, gliding across the ground, like something being pulled very quickly on rails. It vanished again before I could react. And from the ridge, the coyotes howled. Loud, chaotic. But underneath the chaos, I heard something strange. A rhythm. Like they were announcing something. Or warning. That night I stopped going outside after dark. The desert felt different now. A few nights later, I woke up suddenly. No sound. Just a feeling. You know that moment when your brain wakes you up because something isn't right? That. I sat up in bed and listened. The house was silent. The desert outside was silent. Too silent. Then I heard them. Very softly. Footsteps. In the sand. Right outside my bedroom wall. They moved slowly. Deliberately. The sound circled the house once. Then stopped near the porch. I held my breath, waiting. The coyotes began howling again. But this time, they weren't distant. They were very close. Morning came eventually. When I stepped outside, the desert looked normal again. Except for one thing. Tracks. What seemed like hundreds of coyote tracks surrounded the house. They formed a wide circle around the building. And right through the middle of that circle, a smooth line across the sand. A long, straight disturbance in the dirt, like something had slid across the ground in the night. The coyotes were gone, but I could feel them somewhere beyond the hills, watching, waiting. The white thing hasn't crossed the yard again, at least not while I'm looking. But sometimes late at night, the coyotes stop howling all at once, and the silence that follows feels heavier than anything I've ever known. Like the desert itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to move again.